Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this are rarely told honestly. What you are about to hear is not a headline, not gossip, and not a recycled Hollywood myth. It is a quiet, human story about time, regret, and the emotional weight carried by a man the world thought had everything figured out. At 88 years old, Robert Redford finally reached a moment he spent his entire life avoiding. Silence had protected him for decades. It had allowed him to remain dignified, distant, and untouchable. But age has a way of weakening even the strongest emotional walls. With time, memory becomes heavier, not lighter. And Redford, once the golden symbol of American cinema, reached a point where holding everything inside hurt more than speaking. This is not a story about revenge. It is a story about reflection, about wounds that never healed. About names he carried quietly in his heart for more than 60 years. 7 names, 7 betrayals, 7 moments that reshaped how he trusted, how he worked, and how he loved. Behind the polished image was a man who was humiliated, sidelined, undermined, and emotionally scarred by people he once admired. And now, at the edge of a legendary life, he finally allowed those truths to surface. Paragraph 2. Redford's silent personality. Robert Redford was never the loudest man in the room. While Hollywood thrived on noise, ego, and spectacle, he survived by doing the opposite. He spoke less. He revealed little. He believed privacy was power and restraint was strength. Unlike many of his peers, he did not fight publicly, argue in interviews, or air grievances. He simply walked away and never looked back. That silence became part of his myth. People assumed it meant peace. They assumed it meant emotional distance. What they didn't realize was that silence was not comfort for Redford. It was survival. Each time a door closed, each time a betrayal landed, he absorbed it and moved forward without explanation. But wounds don't disappear just because they're ignored. They settle deeper. And over time, those wounds shape a person's worldview. Redford watched Hollywood change, watched friends become rivals, watched admiration turn into quiet cruelty. He learned early that success did not protect you from humiliation, and respect could vanish without warning. The man audiences saw as calm and centered was, in reality, constantly measuring his trust. By the time he reached his later years, the accumulation of unresolved pain had become impossible to ignore. That is when the names resurfaced, not in anger, but in clarity. The first wound came from someone Redford once worshipped. Marlon Brando was not just a legend to him. He was an icon, a symbol of artistic rebellion, a man who redefined acting itself. When Redford first entered Hollywood, Brando represented everything serious actors aspired to be. That is why the betrayal cut so deeply. In the mid-1970s, during a private industry gathering, Redford approached Brando with genuine respect. What followed was not confrontation, not disagreement, but humiliation. Brando refused his hand, tore a photo without explanation, and reduced Redford to something decorative and meaningless. It was not the insult itself that haunted him. It was the cruelty of the moment, the silence of the room, and the realization that admiration offers no protection. Years later, Redford would discover that Brando allegedly worked behind the scenes to discredit his directorial debut. Leaks, whispers, planted criticism, all designed to undermine credibility. Though the film succeeded, the emotional damage remained. Brando was not just a colleague who turned hostile. He was a hero who became an enemy. Redford never forgave him, not because of professional rivalry, but because Brando shattered something personal, the belief that greatness respected sincerity. If Brando wounded Redford emotionally, Clint Eastwood unsettled him strategically. Their conflict was never loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and deeply political. They represented opposite ideologies in a divided Hollywood. Redford believed cinema should question power. Eastwood believed it should reinforce order. For years, this difference stayed beneath the surface. Then it became personal. When Redford attempted to develop a politically sensitive film after 9/11, obstacles appeared overnight. Legal pressure, studio hesitation, government involvement. Projects froze without explanation. Redford suspected interference but lacked proof. Years later, sources confirmed Eastwood had raised alarms behind the scenes, framing Redford's work as dangerous rather than artistic. The damage wasn't just creative, it was reputational. When Redford later criticized government policy in a private meeting, those comments were leaked and distorted. The fallout was swift. Protests lost permits, withdrawn support. Eastwood never confronted him directly. He didn't need to. His power worked silently. The final message was unmistakable. Cooperation had consequences. Redford learned that some betrayals don't come with insults. They come with phone calls and closed doors. Barbara Streisand's betrayal surprised Redford more than most. Their shared history was warm, collaborative, and deeply respected by audiences. After their iconic film together, she pursued him repeatedly for another collaboration. When Redford declined, politely and privately, the response was immediate and public. In one sentence, she reframed his decision as fear and sexism. That narrative spread faster than truth ever could. Redford did not defend himself. He never corrected the story. But the consequences were real. Projects dissolved. Perceptions shifted. Silence once again became his shield. Streisand never retracted her words. Later moments only deepened the divide. Symbolic gestures, torn photographs, veiled comments replaced dialogue. Redford understood something painful through this experience. Rejection in Hollywood is rarely accepted quietly, especially when power is involved. This was not just professional fallout. It was public character damage. And he carried it without response, letting history move forward without his side of the story. Jane Fonda hurt him differently. This was not rivalry. This was friendship. Decades of shared work, trust, and emotional comfort disappeared because of one sentence spoken publicly. When Redford refused to recast a role meant for someone he loved, Fonda's response reframed the narrative as favoritism and moral failure. The media amplified it instantly. Funding collapsed. Careers were affected. Redford never responded publicly, but privately, something broke permanently. Evidence later surfaced that the smear was not accidental. It was coordinated. Redford burned her apology without reading it fully. Forgiveness, in that moment, felt like surrender. When they reunited years later, the warmth was gone. Politeness replaced intimacy. For Redford, the betrayal hurt because it came from someone who truly knew him and still chose to wound him. Working with Tom Cruise made Redford feel invisible in his own project. Cruise did not attack him. He overshadowed him. The film became less about message and more about image. Marketing overtook meaning. Decisions were made without consultation. Screenings were arranged without consent. Redford realized he had lost authority over his own vision. The final blow came when studios sided with star power over substance. Redford stepped back, refusing to participate in a campaign he no longer recognized. It wasn't hatred he felt, it was displacement. He learned that modern Hollywood didn't always value authorship. Sometimes it consumed it. Warren Beatty's betrayal did not come wrapped in insults or public confrontation. It came quietly, through a violation of trust that Robert Redford never expected from someone he considered an equal. Beatty was intelligent, charming, politically sharp, and deeply aware of Hollywood's inner machinery. Redford respected him for that. But in the mid-1970s, Redford discovered something that permanently altered his view of Beatty. During the casting process for a politically sensitive film Beatty was producing, Redford's then-partner was subjected to what appeared to be an audition, but quickly turned into something else entirely. Instead of discussing the role, Beatty's questions drifted toward Redford's personal life, his past relationships, rumors he had never confirmed, and private matters that were never meant to leave closed doors. It wasn't curiosity. It was leverage. When Redford confronted Beatty, hopping for clarification or regret, he received neither. Beatty's response was cold, dismissive, and chillingly calculated, suggesting that Redford should worry less about betrayal and more about what secrets could surface next. From that moment on, something broke beyond repair. They never argued publicly. They never reconciled privately. They simply erased each other from their personal worlds, reduced to distant nods at award ceremonies. For Redford, this betrayal hurt because it wasn't about ambition. It was about power being exercised without conscience. Paul Newman's name carried a different kind of weight because the pain was quieter, slower, and far more complicated. To the public, Newman and Redford were cinematic brothers, symbols of effortless chemistry and shared charisma. Films like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and The Sting convinced the world that a deep friendship existed beyond the screen. But Redford later admitted something few wanted to hear. The closeness people imagined simply wasn't there. Behind the cameras, there was distance. Respect, yes. Warmth, no. They never met privately for dinners. They never shared long conversations about life. They never leaned on each other emotionally. And yet, Redford constantly felt compared to Newman, measured against him, placed in his shadow. That unspoken rivalry lingered for decades. The moment that finally confirmed Redford's suspicions came during Oscar season for Ordinary People. It was Redford's defining achievement as a director, and Newman's absence from celebrations spoke louder than any words. When asked later, Newman brushed it off casually, but the message was clear. Redford wasn't disappointed, he was finally certain. The friendship the world believed in had existed only in projection, and accepting that truth hurt more than any argument ever could. As the years passed and these names resurfaced in memory, Robert Redford began to recognize a painful pattern that connected every betrayal. None of these wounds came from strangers. They came from admiration, from closeness, from moments when Redford lowered his guard and allowed someone into his professional or personal space. Every betrayal followed trust. Every humiliation followed respect. That realization changed how he moved through Hollywood. He became more guarded, more distant, and increasingly selective. Silence became his shield, not because he was unaffected, but because he refused to give his pain an audience. Yet silence has its own cost. The unspoken accumulates. It settles into the body, into memory, into the quiet moments when applause fades. Redford understood that while he had preserved his public dignity, he had sacrificed emotional resolution. The industry moved on, but the weight remained. These weren't grudges fueled by ego. They were scars left by lessons learned the hardest way possible. For most of his life, Robert Redford believed that speaking out would only make things worse. Hollywood thrives on narrative control, and he refused to play that game. But age changes the meaning of silence. At 88, legacy feels different. Success no longer matters as much as peace. Redford didn't speak to damage reputations or rewrite history. He spoke because carrying these stories no longer served him. The people involved had already shaped their own legacies. What remained was his truth, unshared, unresolved, and heavy. By allowing these memories into the open, he wasn't asking for sympathy. He was releasing himself from decades of emotional restraint. Sometimes speaking late is better than never speaking at all. And sometimes truth doesn't need timing. It simply needs honesty. Redford's story exposes something deeply uncomfortable about Hollywood. The industry celebrates collaboration but rewards competition. It praises loyalty but often punishes integrity. Friendships are real until money, power, or ideology enters the room. Then everything shifts. Redford learned that being principled could make you vulnerable, and being private could make you a target. The smiles, the praise, the admiration, none of it guaranteed safety. In an environment built on perception, even silence can be weaponized. Redford didn't lose faith in people entirely, but he stopped believing in the illusion that fame creates family. What looks like unity on screen often hides distance behind it. There were moments when Redford could have defended himself publicly. He could have denied accusations, corrected narratives, or exposed motives. He chose not to. Dignity mattered more to him than being understood, but dignity has a price. It protects your image while isolating your pain. Redford paid that price repeatedly. Projects were lost. Relationships dissolved. And yet, he never responded with bitterness. Instead, he withdrew. That restraint preserved his reputation, but it also ensured that many people never heard his side of the story. Only now, in reflection, does the cost of that choice become fully visible. When we remove the legend and the awards, what remains is a man who felt deeply, trusted cautiously, and carried disappointment quietly. Redford's life reminds us that success does not eliminate vulnerability. It often magnifies it. The higher the pedestal, the further the fall feels. His story is not about victimhood. It is about humanity. Even icons bleed, just not where the cameras can see. Now the story turns to you. Which of these betrayals do you believe cut the deepest? Was it the cruelty of a hero, the silence of a friend, or the calculated power of an industry ally? And if you were in Robert Redford's place, would you choose forgiveness, or would you, too, choose silence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you value stories that go beyond headlines and reveal the human truth behind fame, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.